Hello, welcome to This World, and This World is coming to you from London. In fact, from right in front of Buckingham Palace, which is where King Charles and Queen Camilla are. The coronation has taken place. They went in procession down the mall, which is just in that direction, ended up at Westminster Abbey, and it was a fairly elaborate function there with lots of ritual, lots of colour, lots of pageantry, lots of history, but a little bit of modernity as well. Some embellishments, some changes to signify and indicate and highlight the fact that Britain is a very different country to what it was way back when Queen Elizabeth had her coronation 7 decades ago. And then after that, of course, they came back in procession, went into Buckingham Palace there, and you had that balcony scene which everybody waited for. There was a fly past as well. And yes, there was one missing person on that balcony, Prince Harry, in case you're wondering who it was. And all of that, of course, left lots and lots to talk about. We have today on the special edition of This World, where we're going to focus on the coronation. We're going to focus on what the monarchy means for Britain, what it means for countries like India, what it means for the Commonwealth, what it means for the people out here, and what the future is going to be. We have some very special guests coming up for you in just a couple of minutes. But before I introduce them, we have a royal commentator, we have Andrew Whitehead. Both of them are going to be joining us in just a couple of minutes from now. But before I go to them to try and understand or analyze the coronation and the monarchy, let's just quickly recap for you what happened today. It was, as I said, a day filled with colour and filled with pageantry.
This was Britain's biggest royal event in 70 years, and the country ensured it lived up to the hype. A little before 11 a.m. this morning, King Charles III and Queen Consort Camilla arrived at the Westminster Abbey in procession from the Buckingham Palace, with crowds lining the streets, eager to get a glimpse of the King and the Queen Consort. The spotlight was then on this church, which has been the setting for every coronation since 1066, starting with William the Conqueror. Charles III was the 40th monarch to be crowned at the Westminster Abbey. The coronation service began at 11 a.m. sharp.
I here present unto you King Charles, your undoubted king.
King Charles III then took oath, with his hand on the Bible, promising to perform his duty and be a faithful Protestant.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
I solemnly promise so to do.
Will you, to your power, cause law and justice in mercy to be executed in all your judgments?
I will.
Hymns and prayers followed. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak read out verses from the Bible.
That are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him.
Then began the king's anointing. Charles was blessed by the Archbishop, with oil poured on his head, chest from a gold ampulla. This was the only part of the ceremony that was not open for the public to see. The chrism oil that was used was made in Jerusalem in the month of March, with olives harvested from 2 groves. King Charles III was then presented with the sovereign's orb and scepters, representing the king's spiritual power.
Princely virtues.
The crown was placed on King Charles III's head as he sat in the coronation chair, which was made way back in 1300.
God save the king! God save the king!
This crown that you see on the monarch's head is 360 years old. It's called the St. Edward's crown, and it is made of solid gold. The crown is studded with 44 gemstones, including rubies, sapphires, garnets, and tourmalines. The coronation is the only time a monarch gets to wear this crown. Following Charles III's crowning, the Queen Consort Camilla was coronated. After the service, the royal couple left for the Buckingham Palace in the Gold State coach. The coronation procession included other members of the British royal family and British Commonwealth troops. The royal family later appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony to greet the crowd. There was an active push to make Charles III's coronation ceremony as inclusive and as diverse as possible. For example, religious leaders representing Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, and Judaism played an active role in the ceremony, as did female clergy. Yet, not everyone was happy. Earlier in the day, anti-monarchy protesters were arrested in London. Their fault?
So, do you think the placards are the kind of reason that these arrests have taken place?
It's hard to see what else it could be. Like, this is a peaceful demonstration. It hasn't even started yet. It's just a bunch of guys in placards.
What was on the placards, to your knowledge?
Not my king.
So simply that phrase.
Exactly.
As King Charles III and Britain begin a new chapter, it will not be without challenges.
And we do have two very special guests with us. Andrew Whitehead joining us to tell us what the implication of all of this. And Raphael Monk, who's also joining us, a royal commentator, who I'm going to get to analyze and dissect that ceremony and the meaning of what all has happened today and why Prince Harry wasn't on that balcony behind me. But Andrew Whitehead, why don't I start with you? Let's try and put this into some sort of historical perspective. 7 decades, of course, since the last coronation. Britain, a very different country. Some members who have acknowledged Queen Elizabeth as the head of state have now said we don't necessarily want Prince Charles to be the head of state anymore. How do you see this? What do you see of the implications of this? And put this into some sort of a historical context for us. How should the world react to this coronation?
Well, as you say, it's the first coronation since the Queen's, which was in June 1953. Britain has changed immensely. And you could see a little bit of that in the coronation earlier today. So you had women bishops taking part. It was a little bit more multicultural. It was a little bit more multi-faith. But the monarchy, by instinct, relies on tradition and indeed on deference, and tradition and deference were on full display. And of course, King Charles is coming to the throne already well into his 70s. So did this coronation present him as a king of our age? I'm not quite sure it did. It was spectacular, it was majestic, it was wonderfully well choreographed, but it was probably more mired in the past than looking to the future. And as you suggest, that generally the monarchy is still popular, though King Charles is not anything like as popular as his mother. But among the young, opinion is starting to change. And if there were any more scandals affecting the royal family, and of course we've had 1 or 2 in recent years, then I think that could change the nature of the debate. But for the moment, I think Britain is basking, at least those of us who have watched the coronation, which I guess is probably about half the country, is basking in a very successful royal occasion.
A very successful royal occasion, except for the fact, Andrew, it rained all through the day with sort of dampened spirits. Literally, it rained on the parade. And incidentally, just as the crowds have started to disappear from here, from St. James's Park and from in front of Buckingham Palace, suddenly the rain has stopped. Andrew, surely you could have arranged better weather than this.
Well, you know, the thing that you most need if you are covering royal pageants and ceremonial in central London is this. It's an umbrella. You know, whenever there's royal pageantry, there tends to be rain. I'm not saying that there's any matter of judgment from above on that, but I mean, that's part of what London is like. It is a wet and rainy city. I think the crowds in the streets, they were certainly in large numbers. If there'd been no rain, if there'd been bright sunshine, there would have been many, many more. So I got the impression that the turnout was in the tens of thousands, perhaps in the lower hundreds of thousands. If there'd been bright sunshine, we could have seen 500,000 or more.
Well, actually, I can tell you that the crowds were fairly enthusiastic. They were cheering, they were here, and it was pouring rain. They were still here with their umbrellas, with their coats on. There were large screens set up all the way around here, and people were watching and they were excited. Rafi joining us as well. Rafi, I'm going to come back to the dissecting the implications of this and what it means for the world. But what really stood out in the ceremony for you? You've been observing many royal pageants. We haven't had a coronation in 7 decades, but other things have happened. What stood out for you today, Rafi?
Well, I'll disagree slightly with my colleague Andrew here by saying that I think it was a coronation designed and fit for the 21st century. Let me put it this way. It was a 21st century medieval coronation, if that makes sense in any sort of way. It held on to the core elements of the coronation service, which is a covenant between God and the king and a contract between the king and the people. And so we had elements of that coronation service that date back 1,000 years, actually, over 1,000 years. But at the same time, we saw every effort made to make this coronation more inclusive, to show how Britain has changed and indeed how the Commonwealth realms have changed. Great representation from those countries that are still monarchies in the Commonwealth, and also we saw representatives of the Hindu, Sikh, Muslim and Jewish faiths also incorporated into this, not just with religious leaders, but also with members of the House of Lords who played their own part in the coronation. And also a great degree of women being used, far more than ever was in the past. And I think that really reflects the type of monarch that the king wants to be, which is a very inclusive king who is accepting and understanding of the changes of society and wants to really reflect that, not only in terms of demographics, but also in terms of issues. This was the most sustainable and environmentally conscious coronation. You know, many of the issues that King Charles championed in the 1980s, he was ridiculed for them. He was thought of as being rather eccentric. Those issues, interfaith dialogue, the environment, those are all now cutting-edge issues of the 21st century.
Right, looking at the ceremony itself, there were 3 or 4 things that really stood out when you're talking about efforts to make it more inclusive. It was obviously a Christian ceremony. He is, after all, the defender of the faith. But there was a reference to making sure that Britain is a country that is safe for all faiths and that all faiths need to be practiced out there. Then, as you mentioned, members of the Jewish, the Hindu, the Sikh, the Muslim faiths were present, they were represented there. You had gospel music, a lot of female clergy. Would those be the main highlights, Rafi, to indicate that this was different? The rest of the ceremony was very simple, but these were embellishments that have been added. And they're not minor embellishments, there was certainly a message going out there.
That's right, a very clear message and an important message. You know, my father is Sikh, and I know my father's family and myself were delighted to see, for example, Lord Singh, the most prominent lay Sikh in the country, taking part, and people of all of the diaspora, Buddhist, Greek Orthodox we saw being included there too, the Baha'i faith. I think everybody can now say, actually, we feel part of this coronation. It's not exclusive. And in fact, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, in one of his prayers, said that the Anglican Church here is to encourage and ensure that all faiths are respected. So really a big difference in the past, which was very much an Anglican Church of England Protestant Christian service, now ensuring that others are incorporated without, of course, straying from the fact that at its core, this is a Christian service, because in Britain, we still have an established church. The Church of England is a core part of our constitution, and it's a constitutional necessity that the king must swear an oath to uphold the faith, because he is supreme governor of the Church of England and defender of the faith. But he wants to also be informally defender of all faiths.
Right. Andrew, 7 decades have passed since the last coronation, so those changes that we were just talking about, are representative of the fact that Britain itself has changed, of course, become a far more multi-ethnic, multicultural country. But other changes have happened as well, and there will be people who will question the need for a monarchy in the changing times that we have. And those questions, of course, have been asked, especially is the monarchy going to be relevant to the young as time passes on? Are people going to say, well, this is all very old school? The contrary view to that, I guess, would be to say that this is a symbol. The monarchy and the royal family is a symbol. It's a symbol of what Britain stands for. And you need an icon in a country to tie around and to unite around and to celebrate in some form or the other. What would be your views on that, Andrew?
Well, Britain's also become a much more secular country over the 70 years since Queen Elizabeth's coronation. It's become much less deferential. Certainly within my household, the 20-year-olds in my household were not watching the coronation today. They couldn't work out why it mattered to anybody. It didn't seem to touch on them, on their lives. And I think the reason why the monarchy may well survive is because for many people it doesn't really matter anymore. It does provide a sort of figurehead leadership, but it doesn't have any significant constitutional importance. And I think people, they may be concerned much more about the cost of living, the crisis in the health service, the issue of how you actually go to a carbon neutral economy rather than who is the head of state. But if you asked young people, do they prefer a hereditary or an elected head of state, then for those under 25, the suggestion in the opinion polls is more want an elected head of state than a hereditary head of state. Among the older generation, it's quite different. But among the young, and obviously the young tend to be more radical, more enthusiastic about change, there is an appetite for something different, but probably not the political energy to actually achieve it.
Right. Rafi, I was talking about the role that the monarchy could still play, and 2 or 3 things come to mind. That unifying factor that I said, but quite frankly, there's also been, if you look at what has been happening in just the recent past, there's also been almost, I don't know if the entertainment value is the right phrase to use, but there's been a lot of attention and interest around what's been happening. Harry, Meghan, that book sold a lot. Maybe King Charles's popularity has gone up because people were so upset with what's been happening with Harry and Meghan. Very interesting that Prince Harry was not on that balcony today. How do you interpret that? Meghan, of course, was not invited. Oh,
well, we knew that Prince Harry wouldn't be on the balcony, and the same went for his uncle Prince Andrew, both of whom have retreated from public life. And the rule that the king has is if you are a working royal, if you are performing official functions on behalf of the monarchy, then you would get to go onto the balcony. And so, of course, we saw all of the working royals sitting together, and unlike Prince Harry, and the same thing happened with the balcony scene. And one of the reasons of the monarchy's popularity is because there's a deep emotional connection with the monarchy because of the fact that it's actually a humanizing element on the constitution. The monarchy is a family, and so people do get wrapped up in the story of the family and what's happening. Unfortunately, in recent years, hasn't gone in the best way. But what's been interesting to see is that despite all of the revelations and all of the stories emanating from California, from the Duke and Duchess of Montecito, if I can call them that, what's happened is support for the king now is higher than it was at the time of the Queen's death. I think there's been a huge groundswell of support amongst the older generation, and what we've seen is that poll ratings for the monarchy as a whole are basically within the same broad spectrum of 65 to 75 that they've been occupying for the last 30 years, since the 1990s. And I think that's very encouraging, because it's times like coronations that remind you the monarchy isn't a soap opera. It plays a very important and crucial role in our lives. And I think people realize that, around the world's most progressive countries, most democratic and egalitarian, are actually monarchies. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada, Australia. The UN always lists every year its lists of the best countries to live in on a Human Development Index. The majority of those tend to be monarchies. So they're not antiquated, they're not anachronistic, but they tie us to our past and are a symbol of stability. Britain is the world's oldest continuous democracy, and in large part that's due to the stability of our institutions. When Australia had its referendum on monarchy and republic, the great line to come out of that was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that applies very much here too.
Right. Andrew, last question to you. Moving beyond Britain, looking at what the other countries are saying. I know this debate has been raging even in countries like Australia and New Zealand, whether they should keep King Charles as the head of state or whether they should have someone from those countries. Of course, in countries like India, there's a bit more of a distance, a bit more of a cloudy relationship which has happened in the past, which is why perhaps not that much interest right now in India in all that is happening. How do you expect the other countries in the Commonwealth to be viewing King Charles as time goes on?
Well, they were all here in Westminster Abbey. All the Commonwealth countries were represented, and there were representatives of the armed forces from the Commonwealth countries, and the Commonwealth is expanding. It's now got members such as Rwanda, Gabon, Mozambique, which were never part of the British Empire. But the Commonwealth consists of 56 nations, and the realms which recognise King Charles as their head of state are, apart from the UK, are 14 nations, many of them smaller island states, particularly in the Caribbean. I think there are signs there that a few of those states at least are reconsidering whether they want to have Charles as head of state. And certainly in Canada and Australia there is a live debate. Which way it'll go, I don't know. It's been a debate which has stretched over decades, and as Rafe suggested, actually there's been a lot of talk. There hasn't been very much action. But I don't see anybody in the Commonwealth who doesn't currently have the King as head of state saying we want to be part of this. We want to be part of King Charles's realms. So the tide, I think, is gently ebbing away in terms of the monarchy's resonance in the former countries of the empire.
All right, Andrew, Rafe, thank you so much for being with us. I'm afraid that's all we have time for you in this world on the day when King Charles had his coronation. He's now back in Buckingham Palace. There you can see that standard flying high above Buckingham Palace. I'm going to leave it there for the moment, but I am going to play for you some of the big and the best images of the day as we say goodbye to you on this world.
King of kings and Lord of lords, bless, we beseech thee, this crown, and so sanctify thy servant Charles. May thy servant Camilla, who wears this crown, be filled by thine abundant grace, and with all princely virtue.